Welcome to the Connected College podcast. I'm your host, Elliot Felix. I've helped more than 100 colleges and universities change what they offer, how they operate, and how they're organized to enable student success. And if you're a leader in higher ed and you think that the silos and separations get in the way of student success, then this podcast and my upcoming book, The Connected College, are for you. We're here to learn and work together to bust silos, question tradition, and forge partnerships so that students feel connected to their college, their community, their coursework, and their careers. I can't think of a time I've seen Cedric without a bow tie. I also can't think of a time when I haven't learned something revelatory from a conversation with him. In this interview, he reflects on 3 decades in student affairs and enrollment management to share some of the key shifts colleges and universities must make to link recruitment and retention and to complement big tents with communities where students find their niche. I think you'll really appreciate his perspective and advice. Welcome, Cedric. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got started in enrollment management.
Thank you, Elliot. It's truly an honor and pleasure to have the opportunity to discuss enrollment management and student success. I am in my 30th year of higher education. I've served in a senior capacity role in enrollment services and student affairs, probably for 23 of those years at various institutions. Currently, I'm in my second year at University of Northern Colorado as the Vice President for Student Affairs and Enrollment Services. I also serve as a peer consultant with ACRO to help support institutions from various backgrounds, compositions, and higher education systems to address and respond to enrollment-related topics that they may need to address on their particular college campuses. So this is something that I enjoy. This is something that I, really appreciate and, really having a firm understanding of the student journey, pre-enrollment, enrollment, and preparation for post-graduate involvement as an alum and or graduate school.
That's awesome. What does ACRO stand for?
So ACRO is the national organization that oversees admissions, register, financial aid, all of the enrollment-related topics.
How does that relate to NACAC? Competing or overlapping or what?
Yeah, well, the official organization is the American Association of Collegiate Registrars and Admissions Officer. And it's kind of the governing body that pulls all of the enrollment-related topics into an organized professional forum.
Gotcha. Backing up a little bit, could you give us your definition of enrollment management and all it encompasses? Some people might even be wondering how that relates to like admissions, for instance.
So there are 2 primary components of enrollment. Oftentimes, the common definition of enrollment on many college campuses is first-time, first-year students. And they oftentimes establish enrollment goals based upon the new first-time students. But enrollment is really comprised of 2 primary, what I consider to be macro areas. It is the recruitment and admissions of students, and it's the retention of students. And the retention is actually the core, the foundation of the admissions process. And so when you're looking at enrollment, you have to consider the students that are coming in and the students that you're retaining. And oftentimes we see them as mutually exclusive, and they're actually integral to support each other, because one of the greatest recruiters that you have at your particular institution are other students. And
Right.
so the
That makes
retention of
perfect
students
sense.
and addressing students from that perspective and really putting as the focus of enrollment management is extremely important to address the retention side. I oftentimes in conversations say that really we're not managing enrollment, because on many college campuses, the enrollment apparatus is actually a service-based organization to serve the organization to meet its financial goals and or goals as it relates to how it identifies. And so oftentimes try to flip it around to say, this is enrollment services. Because when you look at management, it takes an enterprise approach, the entire organization, institution in order to manage enrollment. It may be centrally located for the actions and programs and services and actual activity, but the interaction has to occur with academic planning, facility management, course expectations, modality. And so, for me, serving as a central repository for all those services is enrollment management, but really serving as a centralized service body to the institution itself.
So you have the two core functions of recruitment versus retention.
Mhm.
Are those, you gave one example of how they relate in terms of, current students are your best recruiting tool. And I know like one of my favorite questions in our survey is around, likelihood to recommend, the
Mhm.
net promoter score.
Yeah.
But like, what are some ways that those two activities relate? Are they ever in tension or conflict?
There
Share
should be a
more
lot
about
of
that.
integration. I don't oftentimes refer to it as seamless, but there should be a intentional interaction and integration between the two operations. I oftentimes say that they should be clear pathways for engaging a student from the time that a student becomes interested in your institution to the time they're completing and then moving on to their next destination. And what I mean by interested, that can be as a middle school student who's coming to your particular campus on a field trip. How are you engaging them? It could be participation in an athletic event. What are the expectations they have that is connected with your particular institution? That's when they become interested because they form images and they form beliefs of can they see themselves at your particular institution? And that's when actually the recruitment process begins, the moment that they become interested or engaged with your particular organization. Formally, some would say is the moment they complete an application. I oftentimes say that they have long determined whether or not they're going to attend your institution, prior to completing an application. But having the clear integration. So a great example of seeing the connective tissue and making sure that you have an infrastructure in place to support and undergird all of enrollment. I call it an ecosystem, and the ecosystem has parts. So at the time of application or time of interest, if you know someone is interested in you, are you communicating with them the appropriate offices and have you connected them with the appropriate material to address their potential interest and need? Great example is, are you asking students at the time of application supplemental questions, say, what clubs or organization did you participate in high school or your community college? Or if for graduate programs, what clubs or organization were you a part of as a part of your undergraduate experience? The reason that is important is because if you don't have those clubs and organizations on your particular campus, then that's a nice way to partner with student affairs side or student services side of your organization to introduce those clubs because that connective tissue is going to help build a sense of connection and belonging in your campus, which undergirds support and support retention, as an example, especially when you're dealing with first gen students or students from marginalized community. Do you have a way to have their parents and support structures to get information to them? Because oftentimes they're using their parents and support structures to help them to navigate this new challenge or this new language or this new set of expectation, this new ethos known as a higher education system. And so that is usually not done after they have been admitted through the admissions office. So do you have those structures in place as a part of your support services? And so that's why I say you have to create an ecosystem that really undergirds the enrollment management process so that you're not just recruiting students, but you're also retaining them and helping them to reach their ultimate goal, which is completion and ultimately their version of success, whether it is completion of a degree program, whether it is getting recertified, whether it's participating in your extended campus or certificate programs. And so whatever that need is, you need to think about how do I develop a infrastructure to meet the students where they're at and to get them where we desire for them to be. And that's completion of their intended course of action or course of study with your particular institution.
So it sounds like for you, you define student success based on the student's goals. And then the job is to figure out how to help them achieve those goals, whether it's the degree, whether it's a career path, whether it's a grad school.
Absolutely. I think there are multiple definitions, but I oftentimes think we define student success based upon the matrix and
Mhm.
measures and outcomes. And yes, I think there's academic achievement that we meet as an institution meet your expectations based upon the course of study or program offering that you have agreed to give us opportunity to provide to you. But then I think there's also some intrinsic measures that are extremely important, especially for disadvantaged communities, marginalized communities, that deals with like self-efficacy, really the belief that you can be successful and you have the ability to succeed. Because many student populations, the goal is to get to college. We don't
Right.
oftentimes say, okay, you're not just enrolling in college. Our goal is to make sure that you're going to be successful and complete your course of study. And that's an important piece based upon your mission of your particular institution and expectations, whether it is a 2-year, 4-year regional comprehensive land grant, research one, trade institution, whatever your post-secondary needs are, you have to think about how are you going to manage that particular student type and how are you going to make sure you support that student type as a part of the student journey that you're meeting, well, first identify and then meeting the expectations of that particular student type and student needs at your particular institution. To me, that is the fundamental core of managing enrollment and hence the role of enrollment management as an operation and function at your particular institution.
And what role do you think enrollment management can play in that core function? Like, what are the ways that it can help meet students where they are and help them, sort of like understand their journey and help them along?
I think that enrollment management or your enrollment management operational function should serve as the primary custodial unit responsible for the student journey and student experience. Because we have unique opportunity to understand students long before they even show up and enroll in our classes. We have the ability to understand what high school they came from, what community college they came from. If it's graduate programs, what undergraduate programs they've come from, what is their background as it relates to social economic class? How do they identify? Do we have systems in place to affirm our core values as a particular institution? We're uniquely centered to address all those needs. And then, of course, the primary role of enrollment management is to make sure that we have both the quality and the quantity of students to meet the mission of our particular institution. So the financial sustainability and solvency of a particular institution is really governed through enrollment management. So we play a core role. I oftentimes say that if you're looking at the human body, we're the skeleton system. We're the support of the particular organization. We connect with, if you're looking at student affairs being the heartbeat or a sense of belonging, if you're looking at financial sustainability, if you're looking at academic programs or composition, if you're looking at the course sequences, the course offerings, and the sequential nature of how we offer courses, all that should be informed based upon the students that you intend to enroll. And most of that information is housed within enrollment management as the custodial steward of the overall student experience. So we play a
Right.
critical role in the operation of any post-secondary institution.
So it starts off where you can understand students even before they arrive. And then you're creating, the mix and diversity and quantity and quality of students that makes for, the kind of environment they want to be a part of. And that, then the third piece is that class that you're kind of putting together, you're recruiting, you're retaining. That's also like ensuring the sustainability of the institution so that it can keep helping its students succeed.
Absolutely. And meeting the needs of the financial obligation to operate the institution. We have, as an organization and as an operation, we have the ability to really forecast. Because remember, keep in mind, and this is important to understand as a part of enrollment operation, almost every enrollment management operation is recruiting 3 classes at once because the admissions operation is a 18 to 24-month process that, and if you look at statistics tell you somewhere between 70 to 75% of students that would be attending a 4-year school make up their mind of their first choice prior to their senior year of high school. So if you're not interacting with them in their sophomore or junior year, you wait until their senior year, you're not going to be on their radar. And so you have to begin that process 18 months before or 24 months before they actually show up on your particular campus and make it through census day as a fully enrolled matriculant. So with that in mind, you're recruiting the junior class for 2 years out. You're trying to enroll or admit and enroll the senior class, and you're closing out the enrollment and orientation and orienting the class that you just enrolled to get them through census day and making sure they're progressing throughout your particular institution. And so with that in mind, you have to kind of be able to forecast the needs of those particular student populations and know how to navigate and inform your institution of the appropriate resources that need to be aligned based upon the student demographics and characteristics that you have actually admitted into your institution. And so that's why I say that retention and completion should be a process and not just a end game. Because if you can't get them through their first year and second year, if you can't get them to the second year to third year, you can never have the fulfillment of your graduation rates and your persistence rate and your completion rate that you desire. So it has to be a journey that is aligned, where you have expectations that have been clearly communicated to campus on a fairly routine basis so they can understand as they're interacting with students, the types of needs that each student population need to have addressed as a part of them first being admitted and enrolling and matriculating through your particular institution.
And what's changing about how institutions are doing that? Like, what are the big things that are reshaping enrollment
I think
management?
the institutions that are doing this well have come to an understanding. And I think that the firm understanding is that, especially with students that are enrolling post-pandemic, post-COVID, that we can't always assume that these students are going to be college ready. We have to change the paradigm to say we need to be student ready. And what I mean by that is, I mean, if you look at the literature for decades, if not centuries, we've heard that students are less prepared than the generation before. And so they're not prepared to actually enroll. I would say that this generation is actually more prepared because they've had more information to prepare for higher education. It's just in a different way than previous generations, in part because of their cell phones and the level of support services that they've had, and the fact that they've had to integrate with secondary systems, K through 12 systems in a virtual setup. Many students may not have had the guidance counselors and career counselors in the high schools than previous generations. And so they're coming to us, and we have to take time in order to build some of those skills. And if you look at even our college juniors and seniors, remember, a college senior was in the first term, had just completed the first term of their first year. And then during the second term of their first year, we sent them home. And so they've interacted with us in a virtual remote setting for many of them. And so the traits that would normally have been communicated about community expectations and standards were not communicated in the same way. And so they're learning how to engage with the various aspects of our organization in ways that we haven't considered before. So we're having to look at how we're being very intrusive in our advising, how we're leveraging peer mentoring, how we are associating, early alert systems are not necessarily for negative. It has to also be for kudos or supporting positive behavior. We're having to look at how do we develop wraparound services because our students are coming to us and they're expressing food insecurities and housing insecurities, and they're coming to us with more severe requirements as it relates to mental stability. They're coming to us, asking us to help them to understand social norms and expectations. And those are some things that we have necessarily not articulated as needs for addressing the academic enterprise and the ecosystem for supporting students in a systemic way before. And I think for me, it's extremely important for us to identify those things and make sure that we're addressing them from the perspective of developing a sense of belonging based upon the student needs, making sure that they're involved and creating opportunities for them to get involved, not just in academic related, but social related engagement. And then how we integrating our offerings to give them both informal and formal ways that they can gather. I know that one of the largest groups that you see on many campuses that are happening now is, this concept of how do we create environments where they're collaboratories and, how do we create environments where there's intentional interaction in groups just by them gathering, how we establish, set up buildings and offices and make sure that students have access. So those are things that we may not have considered before as a industry or as a profession, but there's definitely things we have to address as a higher education system in ways that were very different pre-pandemic. And so how we establish offices, the level of services that we offer, how they have access to those services through chat bots and websites, and how do we give them in time, I should say real time information, not just thinking that orientation is an event, but really the verb of orienting. You know, this time of year, students are suffering from adjustment issues or loneliness. And so, do we have the right resources? Do we have programs in place to address the fact that for many of them, they've been away from home, and we need to make sure that they understand that there are resources available for them. Do we do programs? Do we do communication? Do we reach out to the parents and say, hey, have you considered just sending a care package or writing them an email or a note or sending them a letter in US mail just to say we're proud of you and that you're doing well, to affirm that they're making those type of right decisions. Those are things that we may not have thought about before in an intentional, systemic, coordinated manner, but we have to be very strategic to incorporate those as a part of our normal operations, especially with the current student populations that we have.
That was an awesome overview, and I think chock full of advice for your enrollment management colleagues, whether it's the communicating the community standards, expectations, or the intrusive advising, or the peer mentoring, or the early alerts that are both positive and negative, and formal and informal ways to gather, and the kind of the nudges for parents about the care package or the letter or the communication. I want to go into some of those. Like, what's an example of a community standard or expectation that might have been implicit before or better communicated that now you have to be explicit about, or that you've kind of seen a gap and you're trying to bridge that gap?
I think a community standard is just social interaction and engagement. So I give you a great example. I know many of my colleagues across the country have developed student organizations that have the moniker antisocial social clubs. People just want to be in the same space. They don't want to have a lot of, interaction, or they want to be in the same space and communicate, with each other via social media apps and or their cell phones, do texting. And so that's a way that we hadn't necessarily thought about, that they want to be together, but they don't necessarily want to talk to each other as an adjustment. Another thing that I know that my particular institution has done, and I think many others are considering, is the stigma associated with psychological services as a response to mental health and student well-being. My particular campus has gone away from just having psychological services to hiring social workers and developing a center for student well-being and using a case management approach to remove the stigma associated with saying I need help with support services associated with food insecurities. Do I, need help completing an application for, because I live off campus, getting assistance? Do I know where to go because I have childcare needs? Even though I may be a traditional age student, I'm responsible for raising my siblings. or I may be a returning student and I have childcare needs, which affects my ability to attend class. And so for us, we're having to be very intentional in looking at, from an enrollment perspective, what are the students' needs? And they're not necessarily academically driven. They could just be quality of life driven, which affects their academic experience. And then making sure that we coordinate these in a strategic way, those services across our particular institution. And so, just looking at some creative ways of leveraging, as I was mentioning, pertaining to our social workers as a part of our Center for Student Wellbeing, they're only in the center once a week. The other 4 days of the week and afternoons and weekend, they're in the library or they're in the residence halls or they're in our cultural centers. And the reason that we've done that is because we want to make sure that we're going to where the students are gathering and providing that support service for them. And it's not just a traditional Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. It is that we may need to have a group, or you may need to meet with the group at 8 p.m. So we're very flexible in their schedules. Or we may need to run a virtual group for our students that are participating in a virtual setting. And so just really being flexible in how we're looking at the enrollment apparatus, I think is going to be critical for any enrollment official and especially any effective enrollment operation moving forward.
That's great. And I feel like that's, the example of the social workers within the Center for Student Wellbeing is such a great one. And the idea of outreach and meeting students where they are versus being in center and doing it virtually and being flexible. Earlier, you mentioned that center and those social workers are taking a case management approach. Tell me a little bit more about that. What do you mean by that approach?
Yeah.
How does that differ? Is that just not being reactive? What does a case management approach entail?
Yeah, great question. So I think when you think of a case management approach, it is really in response to a lot of our marginalized students and underrepresented populations. It is not innate for them and their communities to go to a psychologist or psychiatrist. I mean, it is frowned upon. But many of them have had interactions with social workers or people from a case management background. And so, in our case, if we're running groups, thematic-based groups, they can come to a group setting and get their needs met and receive the services that they're frowned upon if they were to go to the counseling center, because it is much more acceptable in their communities and how they've been raised and
Right.
their ethos and values as a person to go to a social worker than to go to a therapist. Really providing the same mental well-being. And notice what we're saying is we want to focus on not just mental health or mental wellness. We want to focus on the entire being. And so
Right.
using the social worker, social well-being ethos and working with students allows us to actually address the entire student and provide the support services and wraparound services that they need. It also provides a apparatus that they can gather, and they create their own formal and informal support groups where they're sharing information with those that are in attendance and not in attendance, which is, I guess, an adaptation of peer mentoring in a way, but it provides a community, in an intentional way and an informal way that really benefits and undergirds the overall experience of students. And it has had very positive rewards for our student experience. So they know that they have a built-in community that they can identify and they can engage with on their own terms, but has cascading effects with them and those that they interact with that is really in an acceptable manner. So using the case management approach allows us to deal with the overall case and the overall students in groups, provide services and resources that are not just academically driven, co-curricular driven, and socially driven, emotionally driven, in order to address the student as a whole.
That's great. What are two more examples of the enrollment services strategies that are enabling student success, either at your institution or things you've seen across the country that are really moving a needle on recruitment and retention?
I think one of the things that we're doing here at my particular institution and I've seen is to involve or be very intentional in involving students based upon their affinity group. And oftentimes we have living learning communities in housing, and or we may have an honor society associated with a particular academic program, or we may have some degree of interest, but we have not thought about, okay, if I'm a student who say is interested in music, or whether I'm a music major or not, do you have a curriculum, or do you have a set of experiences that you have identified, not just where I live, but where I can kind of gather and I can connect based upon that interest? And that's where I think looking at space design, course offering programs based upon student interests are really bode well for us. And we have a number of those on our particular campus that are outlined and have been shared with our students based upon a student's interests, whether it is participating in athletic related events, not necessarily NCAA, but we have, those that are interested in club sports. They can live together. They can have the involvement together for his activity. They can socialize. They can connect. Those that are interested in gaming, what are some ways we're able to integrate a gaming experience as a part of that culture? We've been very intentional from that perspective. And I see a number of institutions that are considering
Right.
some of those thematic based as a curriculum approach to the student experience.
Do you think part of that is just kind of evolving with the times to be more niche based? I feel like a generation ago, it might be that the football game or the basketball game is doing the heavy lifting, right? And it was all about the kind of like big tent event
Mhm,
to like create
mhm.
that affinity. And now it's more like acknowledging, you need a bunch of smaller tents that people feel more comfortable under.
Yeah. And I think just acknowledging that many students are coming socialized to receive information and to have their social interaction integrated into how they identify based upon smaller thematic based groups. It is how they consume social media. It is how they develop a sense of self. It is how they look for integration within the ethos of a particular college campus. And I think for us, it's just acknowledging that's the way students think, not just based upon their major, because their major and interest may not be aligned with each other. And so we want to offer opportunities to say, if this is your interest, regardless of what you're majoring in, you can we have live and learning communities that are based upon academic programs, but based upon your interests, here are a set of people that you're going to naturally be socialized with, that you're going to naturally interact with, that you're going to have social experiences, and really just leaning into that as a core of developing a sense of belonging and integration into the overall ethos of the student experience and the student journey. And so just leaning into that is what we've decided to do. And I think many other institutions are acknowledging that's just the right thing to do. And I think the third thing that I would add is we've been very intentional to talk about and look at how we're communicating with our students, not just assuming that a email or text is going to be appropriate with them. We have been very intentional to say, who are the people you would like for us to share this information with? And what are the information types you would like for us to share with them, such as are their parents or their support structure, grandparents, or others that we may need to share information with that are not necessarily germane to you or derived from you directly as a student, but are related to your overall student experience. Because we want to make sure that you're not having to serve as a conduit for this information, which can be hit or miss, but we have integrated the parents and support structures into the student communication process. So they're getting information oftentimes on the same day or shortly after the students are receiving information about registration, signups, general information about involvement activities. And that has really resonated with building a community of supporters for us. Institutions that do it well have created an ecosystem based
Right.
upon student success. And I think just communicating that is an important piece of the overall student experience.
And why is it necessary to communicate with parents more and differently? Is it just that like students relate differently or depend on their parents in different ways been previously, and therefore like parents need to be part of a kind of team approach, part of this ecosystem. What's prompting that shift?
Yeah, I think that it is fair to say that parents and parental structures have really led a student's interaction with educational experiences that began at a very young age. So, you know, from the time that we're having to leverage, okay, here's a child's activity. They get out of school, they have a snack, and then they go to their activities and we plan their activities. And then sometimes the activities are related back to school and we're making sure that we're involved. So give us the information that is happening at schools so we can know what is occurring as it relates to a normal part of the institutions or the school's operation for K through 12. Well, they interact with colleges very much in the same way. So they're
Right.
not coming and, okay, these are adults. I don't have the right because of for other things or just expectations and norms to have right, to my child's educational experience. And so just acknowledging that there may be some protected information they don't have access to, but engaging them as it relates to communicating with them as a part of the expectations and activities is just a normal thing. And we just have to acknowledge it from that perspective. There's not a wall between now that they're part of us, we got to communicate directly with the student or the child, and they can share the information with you at their leisure. No, the parents are calling and they're saying, okay, I haven't received information on registration for next term. I didn't know that there was a housing sign up. I didn't know that my child needed to declare a major. I didn't
Wow.
know that what
That's
I
like a
need
whole
to
other
know
job
to secure
now.
my
That's like a
yeah,
whole other
and
set
I
of
think that's why
responsibilities.
you have to integrate this as a part of the normal communication plan and strategy as a part of enrollment because you have parents that will call a child and say, "Hey, where are you in this?" Well, I don't know. Or this is what I know. And then parents are calling you and says, well, this is what my child told me. They don't know what's going on. So it's just better just to integrate as a part of your communication strategy, assuming that you need to communicate and talk to parents and guardians, what we consider to be parental support structures, the relevant information to the activity that is occurring on your particular campus.
Well, Cedric, this is a fascinating conversation. And it seems like the job of enrollment management is ever evolving and ever expanding. And I appreciate your advice and insights. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you for the opportunity. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Connected College podcast. Subscribe to my Connected College newsletter at elliottfelix.com for insights and excerpts from my upcoming book, tools you can download, and special offers. You can also find more information about talks I've given, articles I've written, and upcoming events there. And please support the podcast by rating and reviewing it wherever you're listening. Let's create connected colleges where students will succeed.